Okay.
Good. All right, so our presentation is on the origins of progressivism and education reform. The origins started near the end of the 1800s. From the start, the time period is end of the 1800s to the start of World War II, when this country experienced a great shift in social, economic, and education reforms. The reasons for reforms were due to the growth of urbanization, industrialization, and immigration, leading to overcrowding, poor working conditions, corruption, and just poor conditions overall in the tenements and the cities. And the reason, like I said before, this happened was large corporations emerged after immigrants came and the Civil War was over, which led to large monopolies. And this was only exacerbated in the Depression of 1893, looking more people who had just lost a lot of money and were in pretty bad conditions to look towards reform as a solution.
The social gospel was a Protestant reform movement that originated in the late 19th century, and they believed that social responsibility would lead to salvation, and they also believed that they could cure economic, social, and political ills by teaching religious values to the working class. They also believed that the human nature could be changed by living in working conditions, and they built churches in impoverished neighborhoods, and also urged businesses to adopt responsible practices.
So one of the big things that happened during this period was regulation of big businesses. At the end of the 19th century, large-scale corporations and monopolies popped up by combining separate corporations into large trusts, combined corporations, and basically eliminating all competition. Some examples of this are Rockefeller's Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel. And the government response to this, the main response, was the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Okay, so this was passed in 1890, and it was meant to stop trusts from restricting trade. But it was left up to the Supreme Court. The government didn't make any special committee to hear any trust cases. It was all left to the Supreme Court. The first case that this was brought into was the United States versus the B.C. Knights Corporation in 1895. In this, the Supreme Court ruled for the corporation because even though they controlled 98% of all sugar manufacturing, it was ruled that because it was manufacturing and not commerce and trade, the Sherman Antitrust Act didn't apply. This was brought up again, or the second case brought up with the Sherman Antitrust Act was the United States v. Trans-Missouri Freight Association in 1897. This case, led by Justice Rufus Peckham, ruled that indirect restraint to trade, such as buying a railroad, one railroad company buying another, is all right, but direct restraint, such as price fixing, was illegal, and they found in favor of the United States. Another famous act was the Northern Securities Act, which started in 1900 by President Roosevelt because he wanted to break up a corporation started by J.P. Morgan there and James J. Hill. And this was made to, again, get rid of competition so they can make more money and control all prices. And in the resulting ruling, it ruled that the corporation must be broke up, so this was another win for Anti-Sherman Trust Act. But the big part about this case was what it brought up, the issues it brought up about breaking up trusts. There were two sides to it. One side believed that all direct trade restraints on trade weren't allowed. No matter what it is, if it restrains trade, you can't have it. The second one is that as long as it's a reasonable restraint, such as buying a company, it would be allowed.
Muckrakers were journalists who wanted to expose corrupt, high-profile organizations or prominent people who were abusing their power. And at first they were ridiculed, but in time they helped to expose many social, economic, and political injustices. And they were actually called muckrakers because a muck rake was actually a tool used for raking muck. Ida Tarbell, she was a muckraker, and she had a personal dislike of Standard Oil. And in her book, The History of Standard Oil Company, she exposed many corrupt business practices that Standard Oil was using, and she also dug up Rockefeller's personal life and published that as well. Upton Sinclair, he was another muckraker, and he was paid to write a book about daily lives of meatpacking workers. And in the jungle, he revealed the poor working conditions that the workers face in the meatpacking plants. And he also uncovered many unsanitary practices that they used to process meat. And his book led to a number of pure food laws.
Another muckraker was Jacob Riis, which we already heard about. Well, we're going to hear about him again. This is him. He was born in Denmark. He's not a native-born American. And he learned journalism from his father, and his father actually taught him in Denmark. And this allowed him later to lead a career as a journalist in the U.S. and then as a police reporter, which in these careers he did many of his famous works by revealing the problems in American cities, such as rundown, terrible tenement conditions, contaminated water, child labor, and poor education throughout the country. Many of what he has done and his findings of the terrible lives of the cities has been published in his book, How the Other Half Lives.
John Dewey was a founder of the Progressive Education, which was a movement for school reform. He believed that schools should satisfy all the needs of children, and that schools should meet the needs of children as children and not just prepare them for adulthood. He also believed that children should be encouraged to grow and develop rather than only preparing them for a fixed goal.